By now, you might have heard the media reporting on a big shakeup in the real estate industry. Last week, the National Association of Realtors settled a lawsuit and agreed to some substantial changes regarding how realtors across the country conduct their business. It's still to be determined precisely how all this will look once the changes take effect in July. I wanted to make this video because there's lots of information floating around, some accurate and some sensationalized and not so accurate, and many of you have expressed an interest in buying or selling a home this year. So I wanted to provide the facts as we see them and how this may impact things in the near term. And if you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Here are the changes that the NAR has agreed to. First, a buyer agency agreement between a potential buyer and an agent is now required. This is nothing new to us in North Carolina. Some other states that's not been the case, but no major changes for us here. The one minor adjustment is that in the past, agents and buyers could formalize this relationship at the time of an offer. Now it will just need to be formalized sooner, likely before we've shown any homes, and the reason for this is tied to the second change. The second change is commissions offered to buyer's agents by a listing firm representing the seller can no longer be advertised via our MLS. The crux of the lawsuit that forced this change was that sellers in other states felt they were being forced to compensate buyer's agents who have an inherent interest in negotiating against them. On the surface, this makes perfect sense. Why would you pay money to a professional whose job it is to try and negotiate money away from you? When you go a little deeper though, it starts to make more sense as to why it benefits the seller to offer this enticement. And if you've ever been through the process, then you know that buying a home is complicated. There are many things to consider and plenty of pitfalls that an inexperienced person can get embroiled in. Not to mention it's burdensome to come up with all the cash required to buy a home, the down payment, the closing costs, the inspections, etc. Let's use the example of a first-time buyer with a $400,000 budget who has managed to save enough for their down payment and closing costs. Now imagine they also will need to compensate a realtor to represent them. Historically, this would be anywhere from 2 to 3%, but these days is about 2.5% of the sale price. And that's an additional $10,000 they need to come up with if they will have representation on the transaction. Most buyers aren't going to have this much extra money to pull this off, so they'll be left with the decision of going at it alone, which would most likely discover is extremely time-consuming and stressful at best, or a total disaster for them at worst. Or alternatively, they can find a seller who's offering compensation to buyer's agents and buy their home instead. And this is where we think most sellers will still see the value of continuing to offer buyer agent compensation because they aren't going to want to limit their pool of buyers that significantly, when in fact maximizing the number of buyers interested in their home is how they will maximize their value well beyond that cost. Will some sellers not have confidence in this dynamic and decide they aren't going to offer anything? Sure. I don't see this becoming the norm though. I've been in this industry since 2009, which was the heart of the recession, and so I've seen markets on all ends of the spectrum, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that limiting the number of interested buyers for your home is a great way to make less money on the sale of your home, not more. So what are the biggest benefits of these changes? Well, it will create more professionalism and transparency in the industry. When buyers meet an agent, they will have meaningful conversation right away regarding that agent's professional track record, their fee expectations. They'll get to interview agents and decide who will be the best fit for them. Before an agent shows the buyer any homes, there will be a conversation on what compensation that seller is offering, if any, and the buyer gets to choose whether it's still worth it to go see that home. In our view, this actually creates more of a free market approach with better professionalism required of the agent community and more transparency to the consumer. One of our core business values is adaptability. We're constantly adapting to changing market conditions and new technologies and adapting to new ways of doing business. And it could be a little rocky at first as we work through the changes and find a rhythm, but in the end, we will adapt, we'll improve as needed, and ultimately, I think we'll deliver a better service than ever before. We really believe the future is bright. Thank you for your support, and please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions or concerns.